The Hidden Power of Materials, a podcast by Saint-Gobain.
Welcome to The Hidden Power of Materials, the podcast which explores the future of materials. In this issue, we are looking at how to tackle a huge challenge of our time, the growing number of people living in cities all over the world, but especially in the developing world, in Asia, Latin America and Africa, which entails an increasing demand of appropriate housing. By 2050, almost 70% of people will live in cities, states the latest United Nations report on world population. People continue to long for an urban life, synonym of work, prosperity and comfort. But at the same time, slums are becoming a more significant feature of urban life as well. So how can cities cope with this massive trend? Policymakers, builders and architects on all continents look for solutions to provide sustainable housing at an affordable price. Some large-scale projects already seem promising, offering quality and low price at the same time. Bogota, the capital of Colombia, has just authorized the building of a high environmental quality social housing complex according to international standards. On the other side, small businesses develop alternative and local materials deemed to replace concrete and other imported materials to build durable and cheap houses. To discuss the issue, we have the pleasure to welcome Jonathan Duwyn, United Nations Program Officer. You are in charge of the One Planet Network Sustainable Buildings and Construction Program. Your role is to try and implement environmental criteria for policymakers and stakeholders around the world.
Yes.
This is it.
Thank you.
And you're going to be discussing with Salvador John Liotta. You're an architect and a professor of architecture at the Paris School of Architecture. You've been working on projects all around the world, in Asia, especially in Japan, but also in India, Europe and Africa.
Yes, hello.
And Cosmin Cotora, welcome. You are the International Development Manager of Cerway, which is an organization which certifies buildings with high environmental quality labels.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for your invitation.
Maybe we're going to start with you, Cosmin. Your job is to certify real estate projects. You recently certified projects in Colombia and Morocco, for example, with the much wanted high environmental quality label. What are the criteria you're using? Can you tell us more about these standards you're trying to promote?
Our job, our activity as a Cerway is to operate the HQE, High Environmental Quality Certification, everywhere outside France. With this scope, we are dealing with very various types of projects and in various types of contexts. Our standard is based on 14 topics that are gathered into 4 themes, which are energy, environment, health, and comfort. In what we understood from sustainability is not only the environmental preoccupation, but as well everything that is linked to the human inside the building. Is he living a healthy life? Does he feel a certain quality of life in the spaces that he is in?
All right, so comfort is... And it's an
important
important
key
part.
factor
It's a key factor
to sustainability as well. We all understand sustainability on a long-term perspective, and people who are not satisfied in the spaces they live, even if they are sober in terms of environmental impact, won't necessarily stay long in these spaces, or might maybe want to change them, and by doing this downgrade the performances or the quality of the buildings themselves. So it's important to offer also spaces that are functional and that meet the expectations of the people who live. You don't design a housing building in the same way you might design a school or an office or something that has another function.
Could you give us an example of an interesting project that you might have labeled recently?
You mentioned Colombia. It is indeed a country where we have been certifying several thousands of housing, some of them with a social purpose. The key factor to the success of these programs was the bioclimatic approach, meaning that if you try to rely on the skills of the architect to design sober buildings, sober in equipment, sober in materials. And it is something that you have to link very much to the local context. Bioclimatic approach in Bogota or Medellin is not necessarily the same one as in our tempered countries. So this is a way of connecting it very much to the local context and also to the function, because a bioclimatic approach for a housing is not the same one as for an office. The occupancy times are not the same ones. The needs for energy consumption, ventilation are not the same ones. So we could call this a smart approach, even though it is not necessarily technology linked.
Jonathan, how would you react to that? Is it the way your United Nations Habitat Program is tackling the issue as well?
So, I mean, certainly when you think about sustainable construction, it goes way beyond, green building practices. And it's really also bringing the human factor in there. So I totally agree with the approach of talking about the level of comfort and durability and functionality of a house or of an office. And there's no one solution for all. And as Cosmin just said, I mean, certainly you need to think about local and locally adapted solutions. And when you say local and locally adapted, it goes beyond looking at a country, because a country has different ecological zones, so then, you have places where you have deserts, but also rainforests in the same country. Well, then you need to adapt, of course, your construction to these different type of environments.
But Cosmin, we're talking about the concept of a comfortable, healthy house. I think you have another definition of what is a sustainable housing. Maybe you told me about decent housing.
Yeah, well, I think decent housing for all, I mean, it actually links to the idea of comfort in the sense that, you don't want people to live in slums and live in places where they have no toilets and where, living basically with very low living standards. And you want to make sure that, the people can access the minimum comfort that is necessary for, I would say, dignity of the human race.
And can you define dignity?
Well, first of all, you want to make sure that you look at the whole life cycle of a building, so the lifetime of a building. And that includes, if you talk about specifically materials, you also think about the way materials are produced, the embedded carbon that you have in materials. And then, as I mentioned, it's about the comfort of your house, but that means the basic services that you will get in your house, but that means making sure your access to proper water, access to proper sanitation, access to minimum and modern energy services, whether it's for cooking or for lighting. Yeah, that's the kind of key points I can mention.
I talked to a Togolese engineer who works in Switzerland at the moment. He said to me that in the West, we're trying to solve CO2 issues as well as scarcity issues, but in the South, we have to solve the problem of dignified and affordable houses. In the South, it might be difficult to tackle environment issues, even if it's important, but sometimes the priorities are just elsewhere. Yeah. Would you have something to say about this? Salvador John.
I really believe that North or Western countries, developed countries, and countries in the South, global South, they face different issues, for sure. And of course, the building construction, environment is different. I've recently, we got invited to design a school, a faculty of engineering in a city that doesn't exist. So that will be built in the coming 40, 50 years in Morocco. This city is Zenata. It's between Rabat and Casablanca. It was very interesting to work in this on this project, because we didn't have a context. We didn't have an historical context. And they are asking, we were asked to design following a bioclimatic approach. Bioclimatic approach doesn't equal to technology. I mean, we can really build architecture today in a smart way. I remember like this architect, Egyptian architect Fatih. He wrote like this incredible book about how to teach people to build their own houses by using local materials and by giving like to houses this sense of beauty. Because like once we have satisfied our material needs, we have like to satisfy our spiritual needs. And this was his message, and I think is a strong message that we can build housing with local materials which are nice. And once people direct experience in Africa, when people discover dignity and beauty, they don't want to go back to something which is not nice.
Some researchers I talked to, some of them told me that people sometimes prefer to choose like PVC windows and plastic-based materials because they think it's more durable. So this is paradoxical. There are local materials to build nice houses, but sometimes people just don't want them.
Yeah, I am supervising a PhD student from Kinshasa, and she's working on new vernacular architecture in Congo. And after interviewing many people, and she was saying, why you are not building anymore with bamboo, or you are not building anymore with Adobe? They said, we don't want this. This is like the past. We want the future. We want like a concrete and a glass, and we want like steel. But the problem is that even if this image of modern architecture that was crafted in the 20th century, made of concrete, reinforced concrete, steel and glass, today, like in the Western countries, we are beyond that, maybe that idea. But like in Congo, people are still very much attached to this idea that being modern means like to build with concrete, with like glass, with steel, which is not maybe environmental friendly, which is not like okay if we want to tackle the issues we are living today.
Cosmin, you certified some projects that are using these kind of modern materials.
For us, in our certification approach, we always have a look at the overall performance rather than in the ways you achieve it. So we leave a lot of freedom to architects, to designers, developers, to choose solutions. There was a mention of vernacular architecture. We have observed that architects that tend to rely on vernacular solutions and try to modernize it and make them more efficient by maybe implementing a bit some modern equipment or reinforce the capacity of these vernacular solutions, that can sometimes prevent overusing materials or equipments. Especially for ventilation. In Morocco, we have certified a building on a very high level, which is a conference center in the middle of the desert. All the ventilation needs are brought by a wind tower that captures all the dry wind from the desert, so it's very, very efficient, and everything is based on traditional architecture. So we see that if we try to reach a combination of traditional solutions to answer modern needs, we can find very effective solutions. We might have some ideas about what is sustainable, what is efficient, but if you go to the bottom of this analysis by bringing it to the local context, you might find that some initial ideas you had are not necessarily funded because sometimes you don't have the production capacity locally, so you have to bring the either the raw materials, either the industrial capacity from much further away, so the transportation cost might downgrade a lot the carbon footprint. Sometimes you also have to think of the long time life of the materials and the building. You need people to maintain them, to replace them, to repair. Do you have these skills close by? How is the climate going to affect sometimes wood? Wood is a good material, but if you put it in a tropical context without treatment, without also again thinking maybe to the comfort of the acoustic comfort of the occupants. It can really be something not always so performant. So this is why we really force to go through this life cycle analysis to evaluate the overall impact. And sometimes we see that by surprise, maybe concrete is indeed less carbon negative than some other materials, than maybe a clay that you mentioned. It's always a matter of balance.
Jonathan, Duwyn, with the Duwyn, you were developing an application called Sherpa, which is a tool to help people identify the right materials to build their houses. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, I mean, it goes beyond only looking at the right materials. It's basically an app that was developed with it's with UN Habitat and with some other partners from the Sustainable Building and Construction Program. And it basically aims to look at having an holistic approach to your housing, or even I would say your settlement projects. And when you talk about an holistic approach, is of course you look at the three pillars that everybody talks about for sustainable development: environmental, social, economic. But then in addition to that, there's also the cultural aspect. And so it's a relatively simple app that you can use at the design stage, for example, of your construction program. I mean, this is certainly looking more at housing, and the idea is that you enter some information on your project in the app, and you enter also some information on the location. The reason why I was mentioning cultural is that the idea is that the app is also something that you use in a stakeholder approach. So you actually use it when you work with the community to plan, your building. For example, we used it in Nepal with Architectes Sans Frontières to rebuild 4,000 houses after the earthquake. And that was the tool that was used at the beginning with the communities to decide on, okay, how are we going to reconstruct those houses so that your houses are probably more resilient to earthquakes on the one hand, and also more sustainable in general, and will actually provide you with what you are expecting as the people who are going to live in those houses. I mean, we tested it in Ecuador also. We tested it in Kenya on a slum upgrading program, and we tested it also in Burkina Faso. And the feedback of the tool has been very positive so far, and we are now working on enhancing it and actually making it even more practical. Most of the people actually construct their houses themselves. It's you have housing programs from the government. You have of course, private companies building their own houses or buildings. But the big majority of the poor people, well, they are not going to enter in those programs. They're actually doing their own construction. And how do you actually help those people that are more, let's say, the informal sector of construction? How do you actually help them thinking more about the sustainability of what they are constructing? How can you help them accessing the materials that are more sustainable materials? And how can you actually, make sure that what they are constructing is going to provide them with the services, in a sense, and the quality of life that they are looking for. So that's the objective of actually this tool. I mean, if you look at materials over the last 100 years, actually, in the construction sector, the number of materials used, or the quantity of materials, has been multiplied by 23. And, this is only in the last 100 years. And now, if you look at the population growth, and as you were mentioning earlier, most of the people move towards urban centers, especially in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. That's actually a major issue, the issue of materials, because we are depleting the materials. If you look today at sand and gravel, it's the material that is the most extracted in the world currently. And this is actually now starting to cause real problems, because when you dig your sand out of, let's say rivers and things like that, you change the ecosystem of the river, you change the conditions of, whatever life is in your river, and you might not be able to go fishing later in that river because there might not be fishes anymore. You also think about, well, before all this, you actually are producing the materials. Where are those materials coming from? And, how are they going to, like Cosmin was saying, over time actually remain, sustainable also? And so bringing that additional dimension, it makes it actually much more complex, and you need to look at a lot of different aspects.
Salvador John, maybe, do you have an example of an ongoing project where you have to choose between maybe low-tech materials and high-tech materials, and what is the criteria of your decision?
Yes, I can make some examples. For instance, like 2 projects in particular, like comes to mind. One project is in Morocco. We wanted to propose something like maybe with the use of wood, but after we realized that wood is very expensive in Morocco and is not used for structures. Is more used now for this mushrabia, so for natural ventilation to protect from the sun. So we realized that our idea that wood is a sustainable material changed. It's something simple to say, but wood is not used as a construction material in Morocco. So we said, okay, so what can we use? And we decided to use bricks. I make an example. For instance, in France, if we want to build in France, we have to rely very much on industrial materials. It means that they should be certified, and if we want to do something artisanal, it costs really a lot. But in Morocco, is the opposite. In Morocco, maybe we have the labor costs less. So to do artisanal, to include in a design artisanal works. So this is very interesting to see how each nation has a completely different construction world. I mean companies and how they are organized, the way to build is completely different. And so as an architect working in different countries, of course, it's very challenging and very enriching. And another example that I want to give is in Sicily. We did the renovation of a town, was a sort of shanty town where 40,000 people used to live. At some point there was a demographic crisis. So now in the city, 28,000 people are living. So they lose 12,000 people in 20 years is a lot. And the historical center of the city was abandoned. So the houses, if no one care about houses, of course, they just become ruins. And this is a problem. Some people are still living in this area with many ruins, many abandoned houses. And at some point there was this couple of young professionals, a notary and a lawyer. They were in Paris, but they are from this town. At some point they said, okay, we want to move and to recreate the same atmosphere in Sicily, the same atmosphere, arty atmosphere we live in Paris, the same exciting cultural life we have in Paris for our kids, because they 10 years ago they had their first kid, and they decided to try to give a future to this town and to the kids of this town. The name of this town is Favara. We got involved in the project, in the design of this project, and little by little, not all together, this area in the center of Favara changed a lot. Changed completely thanks to culture and art, because basically people there were not concerned about the importance and the impact that art and the culture can have on their life. They were just living a normal life, expecting the town just the town to collapse in a sense. We realized that we couldn't use materials coming from I don't know where. We should use local materials, very simple ones. And this was enough to use, to paint the walls, exterior walls of this abandoned area with white plasters to protect the materials that were completely abandoned, and to give the opportunity to artists to come and to paint all the walls so that people could reappropriate this area and feel that they were part of their town. People now feel proud of their own town, which is another important aspect.
Unfortunately, this is already time to conclude. Thank you very much for being with us today. As we discussed it, building comfortable and sustainable houses is a matter of choice, be it in rich countries or in developing ones. For each project, materials are to be chosen carefully, depending on the local resources and cultural habits. These are some of the issues that will be addressed at the 2020 World Sustainable Built Environment Conference. This will gather world leaders and stakeholders in Sweden next June. Stay tuned with us. You can find this podcast on our different platforms. Next time, we will be talking about the materials of the Space Congress. Thanks again for listening.